Hello again, this is Bodhi with the second video in this series of 3. And in this video I'm going to be looking more closely at the issue of semantic technology within libraries and how librarians, for whom these videos are intended, can better engage with it with a view to keeping up with organisational and customer demand. So in the last video, I gave a bit of an overview of the issue and proposed a solution right at the end. Taking inspiration from methods in education, I'm proposing that in order to better understand the semantic technologies that comprise Web 2.0, we engage and learn about them ourselves. After all, one of the key features of Web 2.0, as described in Miller's meme map, is the aspect of play. So I'm going to concentrate on the area of code in the interest of picking an example of a semantic technology. And by code, I'm referring interchangeably to two things. The first is the group of languages that goes into making up a website, such as HTML and CSS. And the second is the programming languages that go into making programs, apps, and the virtual programs I mentioned in video 1. These include things like Xcode, Python, C++, and many others. Nail Shawar provides an excellent demarcation between scripting, coding, and programming on his blog, which I'll link in the description. One of the hallmarks of both of these varieties of code is that they are always evolving and diversifying in keeping with the evolving nature of the web. So what does playing with code mean? Well, in the same way that children learned about media literacy by building simple games, librarians can learn about what makes up semantic web components by building simple web pages, engaging and customizing programs, and streamlining their already existing workflows. A simple Googling of coding classes or coding for librarians yields up a whole wealth of information and places to get started with coding. And one of the advantages to existing in the ecosystem I described in video 1 is that support's often built right into any organisations that librarians already work for, with an IT department full of actual professional coders there to help troubleshoot or at least provide resources. So now we have a solution to the issue of keeping up in an extremely mobile and diverse battlefield of new data, big data, competing, evolving technologies. What are the ramifications for this solution? Well, I'm glad you asked. As far as coding goes, the transcendence I mentioned earlier in video 1 comes into play. Librarians who know how to code will move more easily with the times. Although code changes and evolves, the basic building blocks remain largely the same, and the logic behind how different languages work can actually be transferable. Learning to code also allows librarians to deal with everyday problems more easily. Beyond the practical utility of the skill, there's being able to understand what patrons and the IT department are talking about, and that's a huge benefit. Jason Griffey in Ben Enos's article, Cracking the Code, Librarians Acquiring Essential Coding Skills in 2013 says, "The lowest possible level of utility is that you simply know how to talk to the people who are building the tools that you're using. The ability to understand code, even if you don't write it, comes with the ability to talk about it intelligently." And this also alludes to a spectrum of knowledge about coding skill that I'm going to explore in a little while. Job security is another aspect that might inspire librarians to undertake coding education. As recently as the month before this very presentation was written, NPR in America came out with a web app entitled "Will Your Job Be Done by a Machine?" This takes data from a study called The Future of Employment and in true Web 2.0 style places it into a drop-down menu format and gives a percentage chance of a job being automated in the future. Librarians rate at a 64.9 chance of being automated. Programmers rate at 48.1%. Web developers rate at 20.6%, and curation, which shares many similarities with modern librarianship, rates at a 0.6 chance of automation. Curation's also something that can benefit greatly from some coding knowledge, as Bo-Yeon Kim, Digital Access Librarian for Florida International University Medical Library, demonstrates later in Enos's article. You can get geographic data from Google Maps and health data from the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, for example, and mash them up and present them in a way that you think is meaningful to your patrons. This also demonstrates that coding skill can work across disciplines. As a final implication of increased coding skill amongst librarians, I'd like to posit that it may help put the professional back where it was before technology exploded, ahead of the curve and in front of the masses. On a personal note, I was shadowing a librarian at the State Library of Queensland a little ago, and I got to hear about how long she'd been working there, which had been considerably longer than 2 decades. And she finished her backstory, and a young man came to the counter and asked how to set up his Wi-Fi to connect with that provided by the library. And immediately the librarian, this is a woman of over 2 decades of experience in the profession, told the customer that she didn't know anything about that and he'd have to work it out himself. And I was fairly stunned by this interaction and ended up providing assistance of my own to the guy, and I didn't have any prior knowledge of the library's protocols or anything like that. And I'm not saying that this was indicative of the profession as a whole, but it really drove home to me that in some things we can fall behind, even though we're meant to be the ones ahead of the game. I mean, setting up Wi-Fi is a pretty ubiquitous task these days. Some children do it without a problem. And I'm hoping that by engaging with technology and backing it up with the attitudes and values that librarianship instills in us, we can place ourselves back in the fore of information provision. So now I want to elaborate on something I mentioned earlier. That is the idea that this issue exists within a spectrum, or rather the solution exists within a spectrum. Now, semantic technology exists within an incredibly diverse field of input. There's all sorts of permutations of it, and they evolve, live and die along a continuum that is impossible for any one person to keep a track of. In the realm of coding, I don't want to propose that it's a catch-all solution to a problem. As Andromeda Yelton, one of the most visible proponents of the coding librarian, says in her article Learning to Code, which was written in 2015, becoming a deft, insightful coder is a full-time pursuit and thus out of scope for most librarians. This echoes what was said before about the lowest possible level of utility. Not every librarian is going to be able to gain a full grasp of every aspect of coding, but every librarian should have an understanding of the concept, some of the basics, and at least some of the parlance that is used when talking about it. Lane Wilkinson on his blog Sense and Reference discusses the issue in some depth, and whilst he's quite critical of the idea that all librarians need to know how to code, he does allow for some basic knowledge across the board. He says coding is a weekly essential skill in librarianship. All librarians need to know that what a programming language is, how to talk about it, and what coding can and can't do. But then again, that's how it is with every other skill in librarianship. The only things that are strongly essential in this profession are our values and principles, our theories and concepts. And this sort of brings us full circle back to what I was talking about in video 1, about how semantic technologies are underpinned by principles and concepts rather than the technology itself. So that's it for this video. In the final video, I'll discuss how all of this can be brought together in the context of online information service provision.